She saw that a corpse was approaching from a distance on a horse, but it was alive, the secret behind it. In a frontier town ruled by law and legacy, Willa James, headstrong daughter of the sheriff, finds her heart tangled with a man the town won't ever welcome. Bound by duty, drawn by desire, their worlds collide in the quiet spaces between rules and rebellion. Love might bloom in the dust, but at what cost? The kettle whistled low on the stove, and the fire cracked just enough to chase off the chill, same as it had every winter since Starlight Ridge put up its first church bell. 3 months earlier, August 5th, 1879. The sun lit Main Street gold, and Miss Willa James, daughter of Sheriff Thomas James, swung down from her father's buckskin mare in a split skirt and dust-covered boots that would have scandalized half the ladies' auxiliary. But Willa never did care for whispers, not when she had a letter in her pocket that smelled like cedar and sin, and bore the name of the outlaw she loved. Sometimes the family you choose is the one fate blows in with the storm. A man can spend a lifetime out here and never find peace, just quiet. And quiet ain't the same. It's louder than war some nights, louder than grief. You learn to live with the sounds your soul makes when the world's gone still. The wind out here don't carry voices, just memory. They say the desert don't give back what it takes. But I seen different once. Evening sky all blood and ash, ridgeline cut sharp against it like a knife's edge. Just after sundown, when the light ain't sure what it wants to be. I was alone up in the high pass, should have been no one else for miles, but there she was, a figure on horseback, moving steady through the dust, slumped but upright, lifeless in the saddle. She weren't supposed to be alive, not the way she looked. But I swear to God Almighty. She blinked, and whatever pulled her back from wherever she'd been, it wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The wind cut like glass that morning, dry and mean. Snow clung to the treetops, the heavy kind that don't fall till the world hushes long enough to hear it. He rose before the light came, didn't sleep much anyhow, and shoved aside the patchwork quilt. His boots were stiff with frost, his breath already showing in the air inside the cabin. He dressed slow, like a man who'd done it 1,000 times, who had nowhere left to be, and no one left to hurry for. The cabin sat quiet on the north slope of the mountain, where the sun took its time finding you. Logs were blackened near the stove from old smoke. A pot hung over the coals, remnants of coffee long boiled down to bitterness. He stepped outside without a word. Just the creak of the door and the crunch of snow under boots. Axe leaned by the chopping block, handle worn smooth by habit. He split 3 logs before his breath caught, and he leaned on the axe shoulders. He was rising like a man fighting off something unseen. A scar curved down from behind his collar, just visible above the wool, old and angry looking, the kind made by fire or metal, maybe both. It wasn't fresh, but it hadn't settled either. To the side of the clearing, half covered in drifted snow, stood 2 simple wooden markers. No names, just stones set upright beside each other. He didn't look at them long. Just enough. Just like every day. Back inside, he pulled a small tin from beneath the floorboards. Inside, 3 yellowed letters tied with string. Never opened. Never burned. He held them a while, put them back without reading. The silence was a kind of company now. He'd stopped calling it loneliness. Out here, you don't survive if you need answers. You only last if you can live with not knowing. He sat by the stove, hands out toward the faint heat, eyes fixed on nothing. Outside, a hawk passed low over the trees, the only thing moving in miles. And in that stillness, with nothing but wind and ghosts for company, he waited for something he didn't believe would come. The storm rolled in fast, with no warning worth believing. One moment the wind whispered through the pines like it always did, and the next, it howled, sharp, hungry, like something alive. By late afternoon, the world had gone white. Snow lashed sideways, stinging like grit. Wind clawed at the eaves, pressed through the chinks in the walls like fingers trying to get in. The sky disappeared altogether, turned into a swirling grey nothing. Just noise and motion and cold, all of it grinding against the cabin like it wanted in bad. He'd stacked the last of the wood beside the stove, shuttered the windows, latched the door. Nothing left to do but sit and wait for the worst of it to pass. He moved slow, pulled a blanket over his knees, eyes on the fire, let his thoughts drift the way they always did, when it stormed backward. Then came the knock. Not a real knock, more a dull thud. Once, then again, heavy, uneven. He sat up, every nerve tight. No one sane traveled in this, not unless they were running from something worse than the cold. He stood, boots thudding on the floor, and moved to the door. Hesitated. That thud came again, closer this time. A shape against the white, dim through the frost-slicked window. A horse, and on it, someone slumped forward. No, two, no, three. He unbarred the door and yanked it open, snow knifing in like shards of bone. The wind screamed. The horse stumbled toward him, wild-eyed and spent. The rider sat barely upright. A woman. Her skin looked grey, eyes open but not seeing. In her arms a bundled shape, small. Another clung behind her, half buried in her coat. He stepped out without thinking, grabbed the horse's reins and steadied the beast. "Ma'am?" he shouted over the wind. No answer, just the horse's heavy breath, the woman's head lolling sideways. One of the children stirred. A girl. Her lips were blue, her eyes glassy but alive. The boy behind her didn't move. He didn't waste time, didn't ask questions, just acted. He lifted the girl first, cradled her like glass, light as nothing, then the boy, then the woman, who gave a breathless sound as he pulled her down, half a groan, half a whisper. Could have been pain, could have been thanks. He shoved the door wide with his shoulder and carried them in. The wind slammed it shut behind him. Inside, the cabin swallowed them up like a cave. Firelight flickered gold across the log walls, casting long shadows. He laid them down on blankets, stripped off their soaked coats with shaking hands. The girl's skin was like ice. The boy was colder. The woman, her eyes opened as he knelt beside her, met his for 1 second, then closed again. He stood over them, chest heaving, hands numb from more than just the cold. 3 strangers. No reason, no warning. Dropped on his doorstep like judgment. The storm howled outside, angry at what it had lost. But inside, the sound. Eyelens pressed close again, this time, different, breathing, fragile. He reached for the kettle, water, warmth, survival, instinct. No welcome, no words, just the fire and the fact that they were here. The cabin took on a quiet that weren't peace, not truly, just the hush of breath held too long. Outside, the wind kept clawing at the shutters, but in here, it was the fire that spoke loudest, crackling low, spitting once in a while. The kind of warmth you earn, not one you trust. He'd moved the children close to the stove, layered old wool blankets over their shivering forms. The girl, Clara, had taken to the heat slowly, eyes wide and still. She hadn't said much since they'd come through the door, just stared, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. The boy, Tommy, was smaller, curled tight, like some creature used to hiding. When the warmth touched his skin, he whimpered once, then went still again. Not asleep, just quiet, the way scared things get. The woman lay on the cot, soaked clothes peeled off, skin pale as bone. He'd draped a canvas coat over her, stuffed with furs underneath, tried not to think too long about how long she'd been in that storm. Her lips were cracked, hair frozen at the ends, but she was breathing. He poured coffee from the pot, half bitter, half burned, and held it out to the girl. She reached for it with both hands, but didn't drink right away, just held it close, like the heat might crawl back into her bones if she held still long enough. The boy watched him, didn't speak, eyes dark and wary, like a coyote pinned behind brush. He sat down slow on the stool across from them, one knee popping as he bent. "What's your name?" he asked, voice rough from quiet. The girl blinked, swallowed. "Clara." "And him?" "My brother," she said. "Tommy." He nodded once, didn't push further. Names were enough for now. The woman stirred softer and low. He looked over. She was awake. Barely. Her eyes opened a sliver. They met his, like a match struck in the dark. Then she spoke, voice dry as dust. "Eliza." He nodded again, slower this time, then went back to stoking the fire. No one said why they'd been out there. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. The wind slammed once against the wall, and Clara flinched hard enough to spill some of the coffee. He didn't scold her, just handed her a rag. "You got a name?" she asked suddenly, small voice through cracked lips. He paused. "No need for it," he said after a beat. "Not right now." She looked at him a while, then went quiet again. The night dragged slow. He cooked what he had, dried beans and salt pork, and gave the best of it to them. Clara took hers like she wasn't sure it'd last. Tommy didn't eat much, just picked, then curled back up near his sister. Eliza managed a few bites, her eyes never quite closing, but never quite staying open either. After, he watched them settle like animals too cold to sleep. The fire threw shadows up the walls, 3 shapes hunched and huddled, and his own off to the side, still separate. At some point, Clara stood and walked over to where he sat. "You live here all alone?" He didn't look up. "I do." She didn't say nothing more, just nodded and returned to the fire, curling beside her brother. He didn't sleep that night, just sat in his chair, watching flames rise and fall, listening to their breath, listening to hers. He told himself he'd done what any man would have done, that taking them in wasn't kindness, just survival, just instinct. But in the hush between the wind and the crackling logs, he heard something else. Something that hadn't been in that cabin for a long, long time. Breathing that wasn't just his. And the cold inside him, it didn't quite leave, but it stepped back some, just enough to feel the difference. The snow eased off after the 3rd day, but the cold stayed, settled in like it had a right to be there. The wind still moaned through the gaps in the logs, but softer now, tired maybe, like even the storm had spent itself. They stayed. Eliza moved slower, but her strength returned in pieces. She walked. She spoke. She watched him close when she thought he weren't looking. She helped where she could, boiled water, patched the boy's coat, chopped carrots with hands that still trembled. She didn't thank him, not once, and he didn't ask her to. Clara and Tommy, though, they made noise. Tommy followed him around the yard that first clear morning, boots too big, asking questions he didn't answer. Wanted to know why the axe handle was worn like that, if bears could smell fire, what horses dream about. The man didn't say much, just kept chopping wood, breath fogging the air, but he didn't tell the boy to hush either. Clara found a stub of charcoal in the stove bin and started drawing on the inside of the cabin walls. Small things at first. Trees, a sun, a crooked cabin with smoke coming out the chimney. Then she drew a man with no face, standing beside a woman holding 2 kids. He noticed it one morning, after they'd gone outside to haul water. She'd drawn a scar on the man's neck, same as his. He stared at it a long time, didn't touch it, just looked, then got back to mending the door hinge. Evenings, they all sat around the table. Food was simple. What little he had, stretched thin. Rabbit stew, sourdough fried in bear fat, dried apples boiled soft again. Eliza always ate last, always quiet. The children laughed sometimes, at the way the pot bubbled, at how the wood creaked when wind pushed the door. He didn't laugh, not once. But one night, when Clara spilled her tin cup and gasped like she'd broken something sacred, he just grunted, reached for a rag, and wiped the table clean without a word. Eliza watched him for a long time after that, like she was looking for something that might show itself if she stared hard enough. On the 5th night, he told a story. No warning, no reason. Just sat back in his chair after supper and said, "Used to have a dog named Blue. Ran off one winter, came back in spring with half his ear gone and a squirrel in his mouth. Clara giggled. Tommy asked if the dog got to keep the squirrel. He said, ate it raw, blood all over his face. Looked proud too. Then he went quiet again. Eliza didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched at the corner, a crease in all that stillness. Later, when the kids were asleep and the fire was low, Eliza sat across from him, a mug of tea between her hands. You had children, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't look up, just nodded once. Boy, 6, died when the river came up fast. I was gone, logging. He was with his mama, wagon tipped. Water took 'em both. Silence spread out slow. Nothing moved but the fire. She sipped her tea, then said, We were running. Not from the storm. He waited, but she didn't go on. Didn't have to. Tommy cried out in his sleep. A small, raw sound. Eliza rose without thinking, went to him, whispered something he didn't hear. The man stood, stepped outside into the night air. Sky was clear now, stars sharp as nails. He looked out over the valley, the trees black against the snow, the cold biting through his shirt. He stayed there a long while. Inside, warmth waited. And ghosts. But some ghosts didn't haunt. Some just sat at the table and listened, quiet as old sorrow. When he finally came back in, Clara had drawn something new on the wall, a dog, smiling wide, tail wagging crooked. He stared at it, then at her. She looked up at him and said, Blue, right? He nodded once, throat tight. And for the first time in years, he let a smile rise. Small, thin, gone before it fully formed. But it was there. The sun came back like it had forgotten something. No fanfare, just a pale smear on the horizon, melting snow in slow drips from the eaves. The wind softened, lost its teeth. For the first time in weeks, the trees stood still. He noticed the silence before anything else, how the cabin no longer creaked under the weight of ice, how the woodpile stopped needing topping. Even the fire burned gentler, like it finally trusted it'd get fed. Inside, the children played. Clara practiced her letters with a stub of charcoal on old feed sacks. Tommy made pretend rifles from split kindling, ambushing shadows. Their laughter came easy now. Too easy. Eliza watched them, quieter than usual. Something in her shoulders said she was pulling back, not from fear, but from purpose. He felt it in the way she folded their clothes tighter than they needed to be, in how she cleaned the girls' boots twice in one morning, in the way her eyes lingered on the window, tracking the road no one rode. One night, after the children had gone quiet beneath patched quilts, she sat by the fire, arms around her knees, staring at the flames. I reckon we'll move on soon, she said. She didn't look at him when she said it. Didn't have to. He didn't answer right away. Poked the fire with a stick. Sparks leapt, then died. Storms passed, she said softer. Ain't right to stay past what was needed. The silence between them stretched thin. He kept his eyes on the fire. Maybe, he said finally. Maybe the quiet got too quiet. Her head turned just a little. He went on. Place like this makes a man think he's found peace, but it's just silence most times. You don't realize the difference till voices come back. She didn't speak, but her gaze didn't leave him. He stood, crossed the room, stopped by the door to the children's room, listened to the hush of small breathing. I ain't asking you to stay, he said, voice low. But if you do, I got land, got a roof, ain't much else, but it's something. He turned back to her. I ain't offering love, just steadiness. A place to sleep that don't change with the weather. Her eyes flicked down to her hands. She rubbed her thumb along the hem of her skirt, slow still. You're not a man who talks much, she said. No, ma'am. And when you do, it ain't flowery. No, ma'am. She nodded once, stared into the fire again, let it speak for a while. Then, after some time, she said nothing at all. She just stayed. The next morning, the girl's boots were at the door. The boy fed the chickens before breakfast. Eliza kneaded bread without being asked. And the door, well, it didn't creak so much anymore. The road to town hadn't seen fresh tracks in near 3 weeks. Snow had melted down to mud, then dried to dust that rose up in soft clouds behind the wagon's slow roll. The horse was old, but steady, same as the man holding the reins. Clara sat up front with him, eyes wide beneath a hand-me-down bonnet, legs swinging above the floorboards. Tommy lay curled beside a flour sack in the back, tracing shapes in the air with a stick. Eliza rode beside them quiet, skirts gathered, gaze ahead, but mind somewhere else. Town rose like a bruise on the prairie, small, stubborn, dust-bitten, nothing fancy. A few plank buildings leaned into each other for company. A general store, a church with paint peeling from the steeple, a saloon with windows gone cloudy from years of smoke and spit, one jailhouse, 2 dogs, 3 people watching from shaded porches. As the wagon clattered into Main Street, heads turned. Not slow either, like folks had been waiting. A man like him don't go unseen long, even in the wilderness. And with a woman and 2 children beside him, well, that gave tongues something to chew. They tied off the horse in front of the store. Dust drifted down from the eaves as he stepped down. Clara grinned up at the sign. "This where Candy lives?" she asked. He nodded once. "Don't get greedy." Inside, it was warm and smelled of flour, leather, and pipe smoke. Eliza held Tommy's hand, her jaw set just a little too tight. The shopkeep, a round man with a thick mustache, blinked when he saw them. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Ain't seen you in, hell, must be near 2 years. Need coffee, salt, shot for the old rifle, the," man said, eyes scanning the shelves. The shopkeep nodded, then glanced at Eliza, at the children, then back. "They're yours?" Silence hung for half a beat too long. "They're with me," he said. The man behind the counter didn't push, but his look said he didn't need to. Back outside, the sun had climbed high. Clara skipped, sugar stick clutched tight in one hand. Tommy walked slow, sticky from peach candy, hat crooked. Eliza stood at the wagon, still and watchful. Across the street, a voice called out, "Brother." The man turned. A tall figure in a preacher's coat crossed the road, gray beard, eyes sharp, not angry, but not warm either. "You come down from that mountain just to bring more ghosts with you?" The man didn't answer. The preacher stopped a few paces off, looked at the children, then at Eliza, tipped his hat polite but not kind. "She don't belong to you," the preacher said low. "No," the man answered, "but neither does the past." That made the preacher pause. He chewed his lip, then stepped back. "Lawman's still around," he said. "Not the forgiving kind." "Don't need forgiving." A second voice joined, gravelly, cautious. The sheriff, thick through the shoulders, star dull on his chest. "You dragging trouble back with you?" he asked, not accusing yet, but close. The man looked down at Clara, who'd come to stand beside him, her hand brushing his. "No," he said, "just looking to live quiet." The sheriff studied them long, then nodded once, sharp. "Then keep it that way." As they loaded the wagon, Tommy tugged at his sleeve. "Can we come back? I want to see the hats in that window again." Clara piped up. "And the bell at the church, I want to ring it." He looked at them both, then at Eliza, who gave a small shrug, just barely a nod. "We'll see," he said. And when they rode out, dust rising behind them like the smoke of something burned but not buried, he didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because he finally understood. Some things get left in town, others you carry home. The years came quiet, like a slow rain that don't stop. One day was winter, the next was spring, then spring again, then a boy tall enough to fix the fence without help, and a girl who rode like she'd been born in the saddle. The cabin changed, though not much. A new window carved into the east wall. A chicken coop patched up right. Smoke still curled from the chimney come dusk. It smelled the same. Wood smoke, bread, horses, home, if you let yourself call it that. Tommy took to tools like he was born with them in hand, 12 years old, and already he could shape a wheel rim from busted iron. Quiet kid still, but he smiled more now. Laughed with Clara in the evenings, called the man Pa when he thought no one heard. Clara grew into her boots. She could outshoot most boys in town, though she didn't brag. She'd braid her hair fast in the mornings, tie it with a strip of blue cloth, and ride the ridge trail just to see the land wake up. She came back red-cheeked and windblown, eyes lit with something alive. Eliza. She didn't change so much as settle. Her hands stayed busy, her eyes stayed sharp. They never did speak vows, not the kind the church likes, but there was a rhythm to things. Shared chores. 2 mugs left out every morning, a shoulder brushed passing in the hall. One winter night she touched his arm when he came in from the cold, and he knew right then that was the whole of it. No need for more. Sometimes they'd sit out back on the step after supper, watching Clara chase chickens and Tommy mend tack, and he'd feel it deep in his chest, like maybe he hadn't lost everything after all, like maybe some things got returned if you waited long enough and kept your hand open. A photograph got taken one fall when a traveling man came through with a black box and silver plates. The whole family stood stiff out front, Clara grinning too wide, Tommy squinting at the sun. Eliza's hand on the man's shoulder, steady as always. He didn't smile, not really, but his eyes softened some. That picture got nailed to the inside of the pantry door. It stayed there, even when dust thickened and seasons passed. One morning, after mending a gate with Tommy, the man carved a name into a plank over the barn. Hawthorne. It wasn't his blood name, wasn't hers either, but it was theirs. The land didn't ask questions, it just held them, through the dry summers and bitter snows, through the hard harvests and quiet joys, through every sunrise and all the little silences in between. They didn't speak much of how it all started, of the storm or the ghosts or what was lost. But when the fire was low and the children slept, he'd catch Eliza looking at him like she remembered every mile they'd walked through grief to get here. And sometimes, when the wind was still, he'd look back and nod. That was enough. Life didn't come all at once. It came honest, and it stayed. The land didn't change. Not really. Hills still rolled low and wide like the backs of sleeping cattle, and the sky stayed that same lonesome blue that stretched too far to measure. The old cottonwood behind the barn leaned a little heavier now, but it still caught the morning light, just so. Snow had come early that year, first flakes soft as breath, then thicker, till the fields wore a white hush that swallowed every hoofbeat, every nail driven, every name ever shouted across that ridge. Inside, the fire popped gentle. Eliza sat sewing by the window, grey now threading through her hair. Tommy, grown near to a man, hauled wood from the shed with that same sure stride his pa once had. Clara rode off before first light, coat flapping behind her like a swallow's wings, off toward the north line where the fence needed mending. The man stood on the porch, shoulders bent beneath a wool coat, worn thin at the cuffs. He watched the sky more than the ground these days, didn't speak unless it needed saying. He listened now, like a man who knew the difference between quiet and silence,